wanted to make sure you were awake. So you are now. Welcome to the 15th International Cloud Expo. This is the most comprehensive, independent cloud event in the world. So thank you for coming. Over the next 3 days, we have 150 plus things going on, including our 5 core cloud and big data tracks, 3 tracks devoted to Internet of Things at our Things Expo. We also have a double track DevOps Summit, which is going on in the back of the hall. We're very clever, so the DevOps Summit has a Dev track and an Ops track. We've also integrated WebRTC into our IoT. We have 2 hackathons going on, one Wednesday afternoon, one Thursday afternoon. Wednesday is the IBM Blue Mix Developer Playground, and Thursday we're going to build a box with Elastic Box. So all attendees are welcome to attend that. We also have a cloud boot camp going on, which actually started this morning, the multi-cloud boot camp. So it's truly comprehensive. There's a lot to do over the next 3 days, so I don't want to take up too much more time here. We're going to welcome here in about 30 seconds David Tesar from Microsoft, who's going to talk about NoOps does not equal no operations. And then in this room, we're going to have Fabio Gori from Cisco. After that, you can attend breakout sessions, and then please come back here over the lunch hour for the first of our power panels. That particular one is going to be about women in technology. Later during the event, we have power panels from the high-level CEO view. We have a DevOps power panel, and we have a very special power panel that's going to be led by Asher Bog from GigaOM Research on which cloud to choose. So again, thank you. Glad you're all awake now. Without further delay, let me introduce our keynote speaker, David Tesar from Microsoft.
Thank you to the sound staff here for that fun song. Since 1998, I have been an IT professional. So I care deeply about operations. So naturally, when I hear things like the word NoOps, starts to raise quite a bit of negative emotions in me. What do you mean? Like, we're not going to have operations? Like, my job goes away? You don't value me? What do you mean? All right, how many people in here are developers? Show of hands. Raise your hands, come on. Okay, some of you, all right. So other hands here. How many of you developers who have their hands back there have felt some form of delay or challenge with your operations staff? It may be, I see hands still going up here, right? Where maybe you've had long delays getting your code from your hands into production. Maybe it's 3 months, 6 months, whatever. Maybe it's taking a really long time to get that development environment provisioned. Well, you might feel when you hear the word NoOps, if you've had those experiences, something like this, right? Now that may be spoken or unspoken, right? And it's understandable that could be the case, right? If you've had these challenges. But nonetheless, it's not a very positive kind of emotion, right, of this getting rid of operations. So what about businesses, though? What about them? Do they actually subscribe to this idea of no operations? Well, back in March of 2012, Adrian Cockcraft, who was at Netflix at the time, said, yeah, Netflix, we do no ops. And this really minimized the importance or role, I would say, in operations. So kind of along those same lines of that same context. But let's take a step back for a minute, okay? And let's look at what is the origins of the word NoOps. Where did it come from? As best as I can tell, around April of 2011, Forrester created a report said, augment DevOps with NoOps. Now in that report, it stated NoOps is not about the elimination of ops. It's about the elimination of manual handoffs and low-value rote administration. Now, if you ask me, I mean, that sounds a lot like what DevOps should be. But nonetheless, let's move forward. Let's keep going here. I'm going to take a step away from kind of the history and step into what's really practical. The reality is that no matter who you are and no matter what you're doing, you're going to have some form of software development lifecycle. Right? You're going to have some form of requirements from the customers. You're going to design your app. You're going to build that application. You're going to, of course, have to deploy it. It's going to run somewhere in production, right? So you're going to have to operate it, maintain it. You're going to have to make sure it's optimized, ideally. So this cycle, this applies no matter what. What are some of these tasks, though, that happen across this whole life cycle? Well, what do you have to do? You have to do security. You have to have things compliant. You don't want to get hacked, right? There could be problems with the infrastructure. Those have to be figured out. You want to ensure that the performance is optimal for your applications. You don't want to be spending more than you need to. You, of course, need to also have a very efficient release management system, especially if you're going faster and faster and releasing things at a faster pace. So all of these things need to happen. You might ask, well, we're special, right? We're really special. We're a startup. So we don't need ops. We don't need them. I've heard this before. The reality is, right, even if you're a startup, are you still going to have to do all those tasks that we mentioned previously? Yeah, right? I mean, of course, you're still going to have to do those things. So it may be that you hire a developer, and a developer's doing operational tasks. They're being pulled away from their time coding and writing new features to do things that are traditionally have been in an operational role or expertise. All right, well, what about if I have super amazing, fast, cool technology that does really amazing things like, I don't know, it auto-scales, it auto-heals, it reads my mind, and maybe gives me back rubs. I don't know. Maybe then, right? Maybe then I don't need operations. Well, no, that's not true, right? I mean, I've heard this before. I've seen articles and saying, we have PaaS, we don't need ops. Well, no, you're still going to have to do these things, right? And no matter what you think, even cloud architecture still can have problems. There still needs to be things that you do to troubleshoot and maintain that infrastructure. Okay, well, let's kind of come back. Let's recap here. NoOps. I say that we say no to NoOps. It's a bad term on many levels, right? We know that just earlier, it raises up quite a bit of emotions, negative emotions in developers and operations. We know that. We know that it also doesn't really serve a correct purpose, right? I mean, we know that operations roles are here to stay, no matter what. So let's not use the term. let's forget about that term and believe the lie that we don't need operations. Just so you know, it's not just me who has this viewpoint. John Allspaw, who around in the Velocity conference around 2009, was one of the people that a lot of people point to on this DevOps movement, where he said, we do 10 plus deploys per day at Flickr. Right? This was kind of one of the enlightening ideas. Oh my gosh, wow, holy cow. Well, he posted a response to Adrian Cockcraft's blog post, which I put a quote on from earlier, immediately after saying, what you described as the ops in your term, no ops, is what most of us in the community require as doing it wrong, team. So regardless, right, you're still doing operational tasks. So again, another person that's more credible in the industry kind of backing this viewpoint of that term. Furthermore, we have Adrian, and I just recently tweeted out to Adrian, I said, hey, this thing is, this blog post, this thing that was see a lot of people pointing to from 2012. Do you have any other comments on it? Do you want to kind of tell me what else you're thinking? And he says, hey, I moved on. All right? I moved on. DevOps with a pass is a better name for it. So, okay, so now you might be thinking, well, why are you talking about this, right? If it's just kind of old news, why are you still here? Well, the reality is that as I've been talking to people inside and outside of Microsoft, I've found that a lot of people still either have this attitude, they may use the term NoOps, and just it's still really prevalent today, and you'll see that kind of here in a minute. But I'd like to spend the rest of the time here moving away from this NoOps type discussion specifically to say, let's talk about some real stories, some stories from Microsoft on what we do with DevOps. So first, I have to say, what was life like at Microsoft before DevOps? So there used to be this whole concept, right, of software development in a waterfall model, where Microsoft would ship software every 6 months, 9 months, maybe even a year, right? It takes to ship a packaged box software. Now, when you did that kind of thing, that tended to lend itself towards this really monster deployment doc, right? It's like 50 plus pages. It takes hours to do the deployment. And what did that kind of behavior look like? Well, probably a lot of late nights, right? Or maybe a 10-hour deployment turned into a weekend deployment, which turned into a 10-week deployment, right? That whole developer who says, hey, it works for me, that doesn't work in production. How many people have had, show of hands, how many people have had those kinds of experiences? A lot of you, yeah, exactly. So this is not too bad, right? I mean, it's painful, but it's painful only when you have that ship cycle. So every 6 months you have to endure this pain and be like, let's get into the war room and go through with it. But then something else started to happen. We had this whole thing called Agile. Agile software development. Now all the teams at Microsoft are on this clip, and what happens, right? Developers start pushing applications at an extremely fast pace over the proverbial wall of confusion to operations, right? And so this doesn't work, right? The operations can't handle this volume of changes and updates in the old way of doing things, right? Ops can't take the 50-page deployment docs and be in war rooms constantly. It doesn't work. So what do? Well, I happened to interview some different people at Microsoft. I kind of was, recently in this past month, just going around talking to different development teams at Microsoft. And there's different ways that you can handle this situation. The first one I want to talk about is this. Devs doing it all is what I call it. And, this arose out of the fact that, hey, right, these developers felt this pain. They said, hey, we want our software to be pushed out there. Ops just couldn't handle the volume of changes. They were ops, in all fairness. They were probably still fighting lots of fires. They were busy, right? They were supporting a lot of live site incidents and things like that. So devs had to do something. Well, in these two independent Microsoft teams that I talked to, we kind of had a similar story. And that was that developers just started taking over. They started to do the release management system, right? They maybe, hired somebody else and say, well, let's start taking a lot of the tasks that operations had been doing and do those things. Like, let's start doing the automation and all these things. And it's kind of interesting because when I talked to them, I said, hey, I'm doing this talk about NoOps. And both of them kind of said, well, yeah, we're doing NoOps, without really asking me, without really, saying, what does that mean, right? They just kind of said, yeah, there's this attitude of NoOps. Yeah, we've had bad experiences with operations, so we're doing it all now. But when I started to dig in a little bit further, and I said, well, what are you doing for things like capacity planning or, security, things like that? Turns out they actually do have some folks that are in ops or whatever they want to call it that do these roles. So it's kind of interesting, this attitude. And I would say this really continues on a pattern of not great behavior. What does this look like? Well, folks, this certainly is not NoOps, and it's really not DevOps, right? This kind of attitude and this kind of way of handling the situation is just maybe saying that, hey, my silo, maybe it's dev or ops or business, thinks I'm the most important and I do what's, I'm taking everything over. That really just continues the divide of the culture and, not working together as effective as they could, right? So I'd like to shift now to what needs to happen, because there is another way. How else can you handle this change? Well, what needs to happen is really ops needs to evolve. Ops, if you're an operations person today and you're doing those manual deployment docs and you're not helping to automate, that's the old way of doing things, right? You need to help automate. You need to help improve the flow. You need to stop being the no guy, right? Now, if you're in the business side of the house here and you have your IT staff as, just treat them as, whatever, where they just need to do whatever they need to do, well, then guess what? It's likely, if you have the attitude you have about your ops people, they probably are fighting fires all the time. Even if they wanted to, even if they have some amazing skills with scripting and automation, they may not have the cycles to actually evolve, right? So just think about that. Okay, I'd like now to shift to a specific story within Microsoft, two stories in particular, starting with the Visual Studio Online team. They launched the service around April 14th of 2011, and they had a great opportunity to think, well, how can we really do DevOps? How can we do things differently? And we have Madhu here in the front row, who's I've been working with closely on drawing out all these stories, and he's here to talk later. But yeah, what did they do? Well, there was a bit of a culture shock, right? They had this startup mindset. Do whatever it takes. Enable live-site agility. And with that came some changes, some shocks to folks, right? Developers had this whole thing of, wait a minute, I'm supporting the live site. You mean I could get paged at 2 a.m. if there's a problem, right? It's a bit of a shock for a developer, right? They're used to just lobbing the code over the wall and throwing it up there. Also, developers at this point now owned the infrastructure as code. So deployments, right? Devs, you need to evolve here and really own that infrastructure as code, which is different for them, because usually it's, hey, create a package and let the ops guys deal with it. Well, now they need to own that script and that definition of what needs to happen to do the deployments. Likewise, ops had a bit of a shock as well. They said, well, wait, I need to do this. You have code there, infrastructure as code. I need to know about that? Well, yeah, you do. You need to know about it, and you need to be able to use that to do your deployments. Also, an evolved ops role means that, hey, I need to understand a little bit about the application architecture that's going on here. Okay, well, what did that result in? Some good things came out of that right away. It was a little bit of a culture shock, but I would say, from what I gathered, there was really great experiences of developers and operations working together, especially when it came to things like troubleshooting. So I'd like to, instead of going on, I'd like to show a specific example of an interview of a developer and an operations within the Visual Studio Online team, which Application Insights sits under that hood. And to be all fair here, these guys had no idea that they were going to be interviewed that day. So I had my camera, I just, said sit down, and I did an interview here. So without further ado, let's play the video here.
I'm a developer on Application Insights. Work on a bunch of the back-end services for the product.
Okay, I work in ops, so I'm a service engineer, but basically, in operations for Application Insights at Microsoft.
So it started on Saturday. I got a call in the afternoon while I was skiing saying that there was something not working with our product and that it needed to work by Sunday morning for an important demo that we were doing. I headed home, from there, and basically started engaging with the code and contacted Vitaly and IM to start investigating, what's going on.
And what did he contact you about?
Yeah, so basically, actually, it was Saturday, so I was out with my friends at somebody else's house, and I had my laptop in my car, so I just pulled up my laptop and start working with Jacob to debug the issues with the environment and provide the information they need to fix the code and give me a new build, and then basically I had to deploy a new bits of the code to fix the issue.
Yeah, it was definitely a peeling the onion type scenario, right, where it was sort of it wasn't just one thing. It was there was some code that needed to get fixed, and then we would deploy the code and then realize that there's actually another issue, and sometimes it'd be an environment issue. So Vitaly would be working on investigating various connectivity issues between services, security issues that were existing in the environment that we were trying to get working.
A different certificate, I think, was expired or something, to change the certificate and stuff, yeah. But it was multiple deployments, multiple iteration of changes, I guess, and then eventually, by midnight, we had this working.
Yeah.
For the next morning demo.
Yeah, and there was quite a few. So for the demo, there was a primary environment and a secondary environment, and actually Vitaly's sort of management of those environments was critical, because I was getting lost. Like, okay, so which one's talking to what one again, and what's pointing to what, and which cert is using for which one, and it was critical to get both environments working, because essentially one environment was the primary and the other one was going to be used as the backup, and we needed both working. So it was really good for Vitaly to be managing that and helping us in sort of this critical time, and it's evening, you're stressed out, so it was definitely a good partnership.
So did you guys have a little hug fest or high five after you got it all fixed?
He was out. I was actually up still in the Stevens Pass area at a cabin.
Yeah, so we were about a couple 100 miles away from each other at that point, so it wasn't really, a physical high five, but a virtual probably.
Yeah. And it was also sort of cool. There's the deployment process has steps. So he would go back to the party for like half an hour, and we'd say, okay, we'll be back in half an hour, and we would come back online and sort of confirm, okay, where we're at now, and it's still not working. Like, we would get back into it, and finally, I think all in all, it probably took about 4 or 5 hours that evening to get everything back up and running to where it needed to be.
So pretty cool story. So just you could see kind of that interaction between developer operations and how they really worked together effectively and used their expertise and their skills to help resolve problems quicker. With that being said, though, there were still challenges at this phase. Operations was pulled in many different directions. They were doing, at one minute, they were doing live site incidents. Another minute, they were doing deployments. Another minute, they were pulled into something else, right? There was still a lot of randomization, and deployments could sometimes take a little bit long. They also had challenges in the sheer volume of changes that were going on. So when they first started this team up, there was around 70 changes going into production within a business month. Now there was around 300 changes. And even though the operations team had infrastructure as code, they had a script to do the deployment, they were still doing things, executing those scripts manually. They had to do those automated steps themselves. So just trying to do that 300 times in a business month combined with troubleshooting issues was just too much for them to handle. Well, what did they do to solve this? Well, the Visual Studio online team, they implemented release management. Now this, if you take a look, is effectively kind of what things were like before release management, right? You had the source code, you had infrastructure as code script, which happens to be PowerShell, and that was used to that person manually go in, run the script, and execute it into production. Well, what happened is Dev and Ops worked together to build this release management server system, which happens to be a Microsoft product. The developers created the release management workflow, and operations learned how to utilize Release Manager and support it. This made things much easier to do deployments inside of the system, where Visual Studio Online runs on top of Microsoft Azure, would pull that build down and run the updated code in the online service. A couple cool things here that you may not notice. that may not be obvious. One is that Visual Studio Online, the service some of you may use, uses Visual Studio Online to store their source code. Kind of interesting. The other thing is, right, we run on top of Microsoft Azure, and we use our own release manager product to do releases into the production service. What was the result of that? Well, the result was that the team had an amazing ability now to handle that skill. It really wasn't quite an issue, right? That 300 plus deployments, they could handle that no problem. The other thing that it enabled was the ability for the developers to federate the live site and those changes into production in a secure manner. So they had a secure, audible, responsible way for the developers to push their code into production. That really enables things to move at a much quicker pace. Now, developers and operations are currently working to enable even a continuous deployment system here to make this acceleration go even faster so that the Visual Studio Online team can innovate at an even greater pace than they are today. There were also still other challenges. So the release manager, it helped to solve a number of problems, right, where the flow of data from developers into production was much faster, but they still had all this data. This data was floating all over, right? They had incidents in Visual Studio Online, and they needed to kind of try and make sense of all these things. Well, since they had some time freed up, because they're now not having to spend as much time doing these deployments, they created, the ops team created this problem management system, which helps to really identify issues that are impacting the overall system. Now this is a graph that I pulled from a particular incident. All those lines that were up high, those were performance type problems that they were noticing that was impacting availability over on the bottom a number of different days. Now for somebody who's not paying attention, this might have gone under the radar, right, if you just had developers. Whereas because this ops team had this system and they had availability to see these things, the operations team actually filed a backlog bug into engineering to their developers and say, hey, you need to have this fixed. And that sharp decline right there, that's after that fix was deployed into production, they no longer had these performance problems. Just one simple example of Ops Evolved and what that might look like. So here's an actual video of a story of how this problem management relates.
Issue that keeps repeating, we may forget that it keeps repeating, and the ops team does a good job of distinguishing between sort of one-offs and problems, and does a good job of driving those problems back into the team. And even now we're working on a slight re-architecture to a critical piece of our stack, moving essentially from one product to another, because we've just had a lot of reliability issues with the current system that we've been using.
Mike, there we go. So that just gives you an idea of how they work together. Now, I want to snap briefly over to another team that I feel has done a really great job of evolving with their DevOps transformation, and that is the Microsoft Azure Active Directory team. In case you didn't know, that team has, they handle the authentications behind the scenes of Office 365, Azure, and a number of other different services that Microsoft has. And they support over 350 million Azure Active Directory users in the database, and they do more than 18 billion Azure AD authentications per week. So naturally, there's a lot of operational things going on behind the scenes to support that. And there's one great success story here from this team. Now, this is the picture of 3 people. This is not everybody on the team, but this is just pictures of 3 real people that are on that team that have evolved and made a great impact on the business. And this team did something. They created this fault injection system. So they're creating faults into the infrastructure. Right? They're taking that operational knowledge of networking and the underlying infrastructure, and they're using that to drive in performance improvements back into the product. In one quarter, this team drove 19 service bugs back into the overall product, 3 of which they found as critical architectural flaws. So they made a huge impact just within 1/4 of this evolved operations team in the overall impact of the Azure Active Directory team. Now, what I'd like to do is end with another video that you've seen of these two guys. And what I did is I asked them and I said, asked the dev person, say, what value do you see in ops? And I asked the ops guy, what value do you see in developers? And let's snap to this video.
We definitely get a lot of value from the ops team in terms of the work that they do and the things that they manage, allowing us to basically spend more time adding features for our customers. We don't have to worry as much about some of the service management issues, some of the infrastructure issues, and are able to spend time focusing on building features for our customers, improving the product. And the team, I think, gets a lot of they feel very comfortable with essentially having that ops security blanket, if you will, that protects us from our own mistakes oftentimes. Right, a lot of the infrastructure is there to also hide code mistakes that we can make. So I think in general the team as a whole just loves the relationship and really feels good about the partnership that we have, and they value it and they take the time to make sure that all the ops engineers are fully aware of the stack and they understand the designs and the architectures so that they can make better decisions when they're working on things.
Yeah, so I'm pretty new to Application Insights team. I just came on board less than a year ago, and my previous team, we didn't have such a close interaction with the dev team, so it was definitely much harder to to fix issues. Took much longer. Probably the same, what took us 4 or 5 hours to fix in this team, it would take weeks to fix an old team because it was a lot of disconnect and not working together between dev and ops teams. But since dev team is really involved and they they participate in on-call rotation, so they really they really
Share the pain.
they share the pain, and they're really motivated to help us to fix the issue. And I'm just working with the dev team here it's really was a really good experience, since it's always really engaged and jump on issues right away, even sometimes before ops guys. When the alerts go to everybody, so and I see the dev team just replies like here's why the failure happened and stuff like that. So it's definitely increasing the speed of resolution of the issue and for fixes to make it to production.
Okay, well, with that, I've given you a couple stories here within Microsoft of where dev and ops worked well together. But this is not a silver bullet, right? There is no magic path to do exactly this and that works, right? Regardless, though, let's say no to NoOps. Let's eliminate that from our vocabulary. Let's just forget the idea that, or the notion that ops does not need to be around, because when you have an evolved operations team working together with developers, they can truly achieve amazing things, as you've seen in this story. Thank you so much.